Today we're going to discuss the peripheral nervous system, which includes your spinal and cranial nerves as seen on this picture on the left. And we're going to discuss the autonomic nervous system, which works automatically, such as when you're sleeping. For the peripheral nervous system, we want to understand organization, cranial nerves, and spinal nerves. So first, let's review. Remember, the CNS, which is your central nervous system, includes the spinal cord and the brain. The PNS, which is your peripheral nervous system, includes all of the nerves communicating with your central nervous system. So you might remember this picture from our first nervous system lecture. It's reviewing the scenario where we have sensory input that goes to the brain and then motor output. Now remember, the peripheral nervous system is the sensory input, so in this picture it's seeing the glass, and the peripheral nervous system also includes the motor output, which in this scenario is grabbing the glass. Now you might recall that the sensory input can be either somatic or visceral, somatic being the senses such as vision, hearing, smelling, touch, visceral meaning senses that come from your visceral organ. The motor output also includes somatic motor output, which is movement that you're conscious of, in other words, those using your skeletal muscle, and motor output includes your visceral motor output, which is the autonomic one that occurs automatically or subconsciously. So that would be using the muscle that you can't control, which is cardiac and smooth. So we're going to deal today with the peripheral nervous system and the organization that we have here. So your book shows this same thing in this figure 14.1. It shows you the peripheral nervous system divided into the sensory and motor divisions. And then the sensory input can either be somatic or visceral, and the motor output can either be somatic or autonomic. So again, same exact thing. Now, we want to talk about the peripheral nervous system and how it's organized into sensory and motor division. So when you talk about the PNS, these divisions will include sensory receptors, which receive the sensory information, nerves, which will carry sensory and motor axons, ganglia, which are clusters of cell bodies outside the central nervous system, and motor endings. Motor endings are going to innervate the muscles. So in other words, they're going to end on the muscles and activate them. So let's talk a little more detail about these sensory receptors. The sensory receptors pick up stimuli and send the information to the CNS. So sensory receptors can be categorized by their location. So for example, exteroreceptors. Exteroreceptors are receptors on the body surface picking up sensory information. So you might remember that X, whenever you see that, think exit. So exteroreceptors are on the outside of the body. So for instance, if you have a touch on your skin, or you feel a poke on your skin, or something hot, all of that's going to be picked up by exteroreceptors. Interoreceptors, on the other hand, based on the name you see, the in, are on the inside of your body. So these receptors are going to pick up sensations from the inside. So basically think about all of those visceral organs we've been talking about, the ones in your thoracic and abdominal pelvic cavity. So for instance, sensation from your heart, for instance, if you have like heartburn, or your stomach, or your liver, or intestines, any type of sensation from inside your body is going to be picked up by interoreceptors. And finally, proprioreceptors. Proprioreceptors sense body position. So they tell you where your arms and limbs and body is in space. So proprioreceptors are actually located inside the muscle. The idea is that if you know where your muscle is, based on the muscle and the movement, will tell you where your body is and where the position is. That's why the proprioreceptors are all inside the muscle. Another way to talk about stimulus or talk about sensory receptors is by what type of stimulus do they respond to. For example, a nociceptor responds to painful stimulus. So if you step on something sharp on your foot, a nociceptor is going to pick that up. Now, if the nociceptor is on the surface of your skin, it's also an exteroreceptor. So you can classify receptors based on location and stimulus type. Another stimulus type is temperature. So thermoreceptors will pick up sensation about temperature, whether it's hot or cold. Mechanoreceptors pick up information about touch and pressure. So mechanoreceptors are physically moved. So you physically push on the mechanoreceptor, and that touch or pressure pushing on the mechanoreceptor activates them. And then there's chemoreceptors. Chemoreceptors pick up information about chemical based on the name chemo. You might be thinking, well, what type of chemicals do we need to pick up on? Turns out that taste, all the food molecules, are all actually chemicals. So taste molecules that go onto your tongue, that's picked up by chemoreceptors. And smell. So odor molecules in the air that you smell, all of those are chemicals too. So you have chemoreceptors in your nose that pick up on the odor molecules that are chemical. Now let's talk about sensory receptors one more time based on the location. So you actually look in the skin, you'll find that some of these receptors are covered and protected, while other receptors are not. And here's why. The receptors that are not covered are called free nerve ending, meaning the end of the receptor is just free, it's open, there's no covering to it. Now these free nerve endings are really sensitive because they're not covered. So for instance, nociceptors and thermoreceptors that pick up pain and temperature, since they don't have a covering, they'll pick up the pain and the temperature really quickly. And that's important because a lot of times you want to know about pain and temperature right away. Whereas encapsulated receptors have a nice protective coating on it. Think of it as like a capsule around it. And the capsule's job is to coat or protect, like a capsule on a pill. So mechanoreceptors are actually encapsulated. Because think about it. Mechanoreceptors are constantly being pushed, right? They respond to physical touch and pressure. So if they're being pushed a lot, if they don't have a protective covering around them, the receptor is going to get damaged fairly easily. So it's very important for the mechanoreceptors to be encapsulated or to have that protective covering. And the covering is actually just connective tissue. So just to summarize the organization of the peripheral nervous system, we know that the PNS includes sensory and motor divisions. The general senses include touch and pressure, temperature and pain, and proprioception. And sensory receptors can be classified according to the location or the type.